How long have you known about the climate crisis?
I've known about the climate crisis almost my entire life. I'm from Bangladesh. We're one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. And since we were kids, we've heard these things of rising sea levels, how that would negatively impact our country. So I think I've known about it since, I was a child.
Where did you learn about it? Is there some particular thing that stands out in your mind? This is when I knew there's a climate crisis, we got to act.
So like I was saying, I think the rising sea levels aspect of it was always the one that really stuck in the popular narrative of Bangladeshi and the Bangladeshi conscience, because we were told oh yeah, the country's gonna go underwater. And now that I'm older, now that I see it, the projections are that we're gonna lose 16 coastal districts partially or fully to rising sea levels by the end of the century. And this is obviously a big source of climate anxiety and things amongst the young people of my country.
And so what do we do about the climate crisis?
What we do about the climate crisis is, first of all, we have to limit the climate crisis as much as we can. That means phasing out fossil fuels. I think people, especially here at COP, they skirt around the issue of directly addressing fossil fuel usage that is, unequivocally linked to why we are in this crisis to begin with. I think the second thing we have to do is, for countries like mine, which are already experiencing the negative impacts of climate change, we have to adapt. We have to put money towards adaptation, towards protecting the most vulnerable, protecting poor coastal communities, farmers, fisher folk, people who are already experiencing those effects, and give them the tools and resources to survive in what is a changing world right now, and to deal with the loss and damage that they're already experiencing.
Who should pay the loss and damage, and how much do you think they need to pay?
The loss and damage should be paid by the people that have contributed the most to this crisis. This is not a new crisis. This is a crisis that has been in the works, since the Industrial Revolution. The fact is that certain countries have developed in extremely carbon-intensive ways, where certain countries are still underdeveloped and are developing. What we need to do is twofold on this. First is we have to encourage decarbonized development, which is, for the developing world, they need to find ways of developing now without burning coal, without burning gas, without burning oil in the same way that the developed world did. And I think the second thing is we have to understand that there is a historical debt here, that developed countries burned carbon to become industrialized and to become rich. And that's fine. But that's how we ended up in this crisis today. And they, as a result, have to acknowledge the historical responsibility of burning all that carbon and causing the climate crisis.
So what countries in particular do you think the Industrial Revolution, I guess, began in the United Kingdom or Britain? They should pay, maybe Americans?
I think a lot of countries in Europe, I'm not going to name specific countries, I think a lot of countries in Europe, in North America, in East Asia, in the Pacific, the developed world as we know it, have traditionally developed using carbon-intensive energy. And I think part of the responsibility that they have, the common but differentiated responsibility that they have within the climate crisis, is not only to pay the historical debt of the carbon-intensive development, but also to assist and give capacity to the developing world to encourage decarbonized development.
Cool. And how much longer do you think we have to address the climate crisis before it's too late?
I think we should have addressed the climate crisis years ago, right? I think we had certain fossil fuel companies that hid knowledge of the climate crisis for decades from the public, and that has caused us to have a delayed action on it. So, the best time to have addressed the climate crisis was yesterday, and we have to act right now. I think if we're being realistic, we need to see real, tangible, concrete action within the next few years if we're going to make sure that the majority of human civilization does not incur the mass suffering that the climate crisis and extreme weather events will bring.
And you mentioned the oil companies. Are there any people that, or organizations and institutions that you regard as climate criminals? I mean, Robert Kennedy Jr. in America said some of these people ought to be hauled before The Hague and basically jailed. Can you think of any climate criminals that should be brought to justice?
Look, I'm a lawyer myself, right? So I work for a public litigation firm in my own country. And I think there's a thing of non-retroactivity. I think we know that Exxon, for example, knew about the climate crisis for decades before it was released to the public. The fact is that there is a principle of non-retroactivity in law where you can't criminalize someone for something that wasn't a crime when they committed it, right? But I think, out of the optimist in me, it's the fact that now in 2022, we do know about the climate crisis. We do know that action is essential and urgent. So if anyone is now standing opposed to that, whether it be oil majors, governments, private individuals, whoever that may be, I think that is a problem. I don't think there's much point in really worrying about the past in that sense. But I think from now on, everyone needs to do their bit, and that includes the big established energy companies.
Yeah, how about Donald Trump, for example? He just announced he's running for president again, and he's been saying for years that the climate change is a hoax. It's invented by the Chinese to deindustrialize America. I mean, what do you do with that? What should we do with that?
I mean, I think the fact is that the American people, right? I lived in the States for many years.
I think hear you perfect English,
you can hear my accent, right? But I think the fact is that climate denialism is on the down low now. It's not like what it was, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, when a large part of the American majority were skeptical of the issue. The fact is that we have consensus now, scientific consensus. Most of the world, I would say 90-something% of the world agrees that there is human-induced effects to the climate crisis, and the climate crisis is real and it's urgent. I think people like Donald Trump who are saying things like that, he's saying those things to try and win some political points. But the fact is that in a country like America, right, a rich country, a developed country, the education of the people, the public awareness should be strong enough where people don't buy into something which is an abject lie.
So the schools need to do a better job of teaching the kids about the climate crisis?
Absolutely. And I think children and youth are at the forefront of this. They're going to be the ones that inherit a climate changed world, and they can't really trust people who are denying that, who are trying to lead them away from that, because, climate denialism in general, right? It's just not something that anyone can really agree with if you have access to the internet, if you have, just basic education at this point.
Well, we have whole states that are governed by climate deniers. My state of Florida, our governor says that, climate change, whatever. They're not going to be teaching kids this stuff in school. Should the UN play a role in that?
I don't know if necessarily the UN should play a role in that, because obviously this is, your domestic policies. But I think at the same time, you have to understand, and I think this needs to be called out also within the media who have a responsibility as the fourth estate, that do these people genuinely believe that, right? Does Donald Trump genuinely believe that? Does Ron DeSantis genuinely believe that climate change
your American politics.
Right. Do they actually believe that? Or are they saying that because they think that's what's going to win them votes? Right? Are they saying that because they're trying to incite some masses? And I think the media really has a responsibility here to call that out when they see it.
Hey man, it's a real pleasure to meet you. Thank you, sir.